Imagine a world where prices were always just right. You could buy anything you wanted for a fair price without ever having to worry about being ripped off or getting an amazing deal. Sounds pretty nice, right? Well, it turns out that this world doesn't exist. And in fact, prices can be too high or too low, which causes all sorts of problems for individuals, businesses, and the entire economy. So, what actually happens when prices are too high or too low? Let's start with the case of prices that are too high. Imagine that you're trying to buy a new car, but the prices are so high that you can't afford the car that you want. What would you do in this situation? You might decide to hold off on buying a new car and instead keep your old one for a little longer. Or maybe you would choose to buy a used car instead of a new one. Whatever you decide, the car company is going to lose out on a sale because their prices are just too high for you and many other potential customers. In general, when prices are too high, people tend to buy less. This is known as the law of demand. As the price of a good or service increases, the quantity demanded decreases. The opposite is also true. When prices are low, people tend to buy more. So, high prices lead to less economic activity, which can cause all sorts of problems. For example, if prices are too high, businesses may not be able to sell enough of their products to cover their costs, and they may end up losing money. In fact, high prices can even lead to a recession. A recession is a period of time when the economy slows down and people start to lose their jobs. Recessions usually happen when people have too little money to spend because they don't have enough jobs or because they're paying too much for things like housing or healthcare. High prices can also lead to inflation, which is when the general level of prices throughout the economy starts to increase over time. Inflation can be a serious problem because it means that your money isn't worth as much anymore. For example, if inflation is 2% per year, then it means that the average price of goods and services is increasing by 2% each year. This means that $1 today will only be worth 98 cents next year. Over time, this can make it harder and harder to pay for the things that you need and want. Inflation can also lead to unemployment, which is when people who want to work can't find jobs. This happens because when prices are high, businesses can't afford to hire as many people as they would like to. As a result, people may start to lose their jobs, or they may not be able to find jobs in the first place. In addition to these problems, high prices can also lead to inequality, which is when there is a large gap between the rich and the poor. This happens because when prices are high, it is harder for people who are already struggling to make ends meet to get ahead. As a result, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So those are some of the problems that can rise when prices are too high. But what happens when prices are too low? Just like when prices are too high, low prices can also lead to all sorts of problems. For example, let's say that you're a farmer who grows corn. If the price of corn is too low, you may not be able to make enough money to cover your costs. This means that you may end up losing money on the corn that you grow. As a result, farmers may start to grow less corn, which can lead to shortages of corn. Low prices can also lead to a depression, which is when the economy slows down even further than during a recession. This happens because when prices are too low, businesses can't make enough money to stay in business. As a result, people may lose their jobs and the economy may start to shrink. Low prices can also lead to deflation, which is when the general level of prices throughout the economy starts to decrease over time. Deflation can be a serious problem because it means that your money is worth more and more each year. For example, if deflation is 2% per year, then it means that the average price of goods and services is decreasing by 2% each year. This means that $1 today will be worth $1.02 next year. Over time, this can make it easier to buy the things that you need and want. But deflation can also lead to unemployment, which is when people who want to work can't find jobs. This happens because when prices are too low, businesses can't afford to hire as many people as they would like to. As a result, people may start to lose their jobs, or they may not be able to find jobs in the first place. In addition to these problems, low prices can also lead to inequality, which is when there is a large gap between the rich and the poor. This happens because when prices are too low, it is harder for people who are already struggling to make ends meet to get ahead. As a result, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So those are some of the problems that can rise when prices are too low. Now, you may be wondering how economists determine whether prices are too high or too low. The answer is that there's no easy way to do this. Economists use a variety of different methods to try to gauge whether prices are at a reasonable level. One common method is to look at something called the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. The CPI is a measure of the average price of a basket of goods and services that is supposed to represent the stuff that the average consumer buys. By tracking the CPI, economists can see whether prices are rising, falling, or staying the same over time. Another common method economists use to determine whether prices are too high or too low is to look at something called the GDP deflator. The GDP deflator is a measure of the prices of all the goods and services produced in an economy. By tracking the GDP deflator, economists can see whether prices are rising, falling, or staying the same over time. In addition to looking at these measures, economists also talk to people and businesses to get a sense of how they think prices are doing. They also look at a variety of other data points to try to get a complete picture of the state of prices in the economy. Ultimately, though, there is no perfect way to determine whether prices are too high or too low. It is a judgment call that economists have to make based on all the available evidence. Now, you might be wondering why we don't just try to keep prices at a level that is neither too high nor too low. The truth is that it is very difficult to do this. For example, if the government tried to set prices too low, this could lead to the problems that we talked about earlier, such as shortages and depressions. On the other hand, if the government tried to set prices too high, this could lead to other problems, such as inflation and unemployment. Therefore, it is very difficult to find that sweet spot where prices are just right. In fact, many economists believe that it is impossible to keep prices at a level that is neither too high nor too low. They argue that the economy is simply too complex and there are too many variables at play. As a result, it is impossible for the government to set prices perfectly. So, what should we do about this? Well, many economists believe that the best thing that we can do is to let the free market determine prices. They argue that the free market is the most efficient way to allocate resources and that it will generally produce the best results. Of course, there are times when the free market doesn't work so well. For example, during the Great Depression, prices were too low, and this was causing all sorts of problems. In situations like this, the government may need to step in and take some action. But generally speaking, economists believe that the free market is the best way to set prices. The bottom line is that prices affect all of us in big and small ways every day. It is important to understand what happens when prices are too high or too low so that we can be better informed citizens and make more informed decisions about our own spending. So the next time you go to the store, take a few minutes to appreciate the complex economic forces that are at play when you pay for your groceries. Who knows, you might just learn something new. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Thank you for watching.